Hello, my name is Stephon Frazier. I'm the author of the Motorcycle Shifting Handbook, a guide for current and future riders who would like to learn proper shifting technique on a motorcycle. I'm making this video today to kind of demonstrate how clutchless shifting works on a motorcycle and how efficient clutch shifting also works on a motorcycle. A lot of people really don't know why it works in the first place. They say a lot of times that you're banging through gears. You're not really banging through gears. You can perform clutchless shifts smoothly without damaging your gearbox. You can also perform clutchless downshifts without any problem also. It all has to do with torque reduction ultimately, and you could reduce torque when you're on the throttle and go slightly off, and you reduce torque when you're off the throttle and go slightly on throttle. What I'm going to do here really quick, without going into crazy detail, is just demonstrate what actually happens within a gearbox. This is a Kawasaki ZX6R 2013 gearbox. Kawasaki has ultimately what's called a cassette transmission, which allows you to take the transmission out, the gearbox out, without having to disassemble the engine. Let's get to this demonstration, and I'm going to talk to you about a few basic principles regarding gear shifting, clutchless gear shifting, and yeah, hopefully this kind of sheds some light on what's actually happening. What I'm going to do is we're looking at second gear right now. Second gear is engaged. What you got to understand is you have your input shaft, which is connected to your clutch, and then your output shaft right here. This is connected to your rear wheel through the chain and the front sprocket. So your front sprocket on the outside of the motorcycle would go right here on this shaft. So this is hooked up to your rear wheel. Just think of this as your rear wheel. You have your front sprocket here. Your chain would be connected to this front sprocket, which delivers power to the rear wheel. Down here is your input shaft, which is behind it. The clutch would be connected to this part. So when I turn the input shaft, it turns the output shaft. What we have in a constant sequential transmission are gear dogs and slots. As you can see, I'm going to actually take this out and probably make a big fat mess. But these are gear dogs. You can see these protrusions on the side of the gear. These made up with the slots, and that provides drive to the motorcycle. So what we have here is second gear is engaged. Let me see if I can get this on without having too much of a headache. Second gear is engaged, and okay, there we go, perfect. Second gear is engaged. Now when you open the throttle, that's going to turn your input shaft right here. When you turn your input shaft, the gears are already meshed up. It's going to turn your output shaft, and this gear, I gotta take this off real quick, is, you really can't see it that well, it's splined to the shaft. Basically, it's fixed to this shaft. And every gear consists of a free spinning gear and a fixed spinning gear. And because of that, what's allowed is the gears to turn at different speeds when you perform a throttle input. And that allows, when you have that speed difference, that slight speed difference, it allows torque to be released where torque is not being transmitted at all, and allows you to change gears. Okay, now here we go. I'm simulating opening the throttle, okay? So when you open the throttle, I hope you can see that gear slot wall contacts the gear dog. Now the truth is there's not enough force really. This could kind of slide in and out because only one side is delivering power. This is kind of just loose and limp. What needs to be done is, well, what actually happens is you have a motorcycle, a 400-pound plus motorcycle that has to be moved. So there actually is resistance here. So I'm going to take my hand and simulate there being resistance. The resistance of the motorcycle, the tire, the rider on top of the motorcycle. And that provides a load for the input shaft or the engine to work against. So when you do that, what that does is it interlocks the gear dog and the slot. And when you do that, you can't shift gears. If you ever pressed on your shift lever while you have the throttle open or even closed, you're not able to shift unless you reduce torque by pulling in the clutch or releasing the throttle a little bit. And that's because there's a load. It's the equivalent of having your hands pressed together. If you have your hands lightly pressed together, somebody could come by and just slap your hand down. But if you provide some resistance and then you push on this, it compresses your hands together, and nobody's going to be able to come by and just slap your hand unless they're extremely stronger than you or they're doing it with a baseball bat. But that provides the tension and the load that doesn't allow you to shift gears when you have the throttle open or closed. So in that sense, in order to shift, you're always going to have to reduce torque. A lot of people, they don't like preloading the shift lever, and it's because they say, oh, it's gonna hurt the gearbox or damage the gearbox, and that's just not the case. Unless you're providing a tremendous amount of force, you're not going to be able to shift gears. More than likely, you'll probably bend the shift lever in the process of bending a shift fork. More than likely, you'll bend your shift forks by forcing gears into place if you get a false neutral. Slowly shifting gears because you allow too much of a time lapse between the gear ratio speeds, and that's usually the case. You're never really gonna damage gear forks, shift forks, by preloading the shift lever. If you wanted to try to shift with the throttle open by preloading the shift lever, you would have to apply a massive amount of force, and most people aren't able to do that. And more than likely, like I said before, you would bend your shift lever in the process before you bent your shift fork. But okay, getting back to my demonstration. Okay, I'm on the throttle, and the input gear turns the output gear. Like I said, I'm gonna simulate a load to demonstrate what actually happens. So when you're on the throttle, the gear dog is driving the output gear by pressing against the gear slot. Well, if you wanted to do a clutchless shift, what you would end up doing is reducing your throttle input, which would slow your input gear. I hope you can see that. My hand's not in the way, hopefully. So let's just say you slow it down, right? Like, this is your actual speed with the throttle open. Horrible motorcycle noise. And I ride a motorcycle. I should know how to make the noise properly. Anyway. And then you slow down the speed. What'll happen is your rear wheel is going to continue spinning. So what happens when your rear wheel continues spinning is that the spline gear behind this gear wheel, the spline gear that's fixed to the shaft, is going to rotate. And then when it does that, it rotates the gear dog away from the slot wall. Now in this phase right here, there's no torque being transmitted at all. So if you have a preloaded shift lever, the moment this happens, it's going to immediately shift into the next gear, whether up or down, depending on what you do. Because you can have the throttle open and let off and upshift or downshift if you want it, the truth. But typically when we're riding, we have the throttle open, we close it a little bit, we let off a little bit, and we upshift to the next gear. So in this phase right here, you could shift to the next gear. Now if you wait too long, this whole transition takes place, and now you have a closed throttle and you wouldn't be able to shift. Now this is a closed throttle, and when you have a closed throttle, what happens? The output shaft or output gear drives the input gear or shaft. So this is a closed throttle. You see how the gear dog is pressed up against the left side of the slot wall. You have it turning. So you have throttle open, then you close it. Boom! And now the output gear is driving the input gear. And guess what? I have to simulate the load of an idling engine because you don't have the throttle open anymore. So the rear wheel, the output shaft, has to fight the resistance of the engine, an idling closed throttle engine. And that presses the gear dog and slot together, once again not allowing you to shift with a closed throttle unless you reduce torque. So for closed throttle clutchless downshift, what are you going to do to reduce torque? You're going to open the throttle just slightly. Typically what's called a blip of the throttle. And I'm going to simulate what happens when you blip the throttle. So you have your closed throttle right here. The gear dog is pressing forcefully against the slot wall as the engine, the input shaft gear resists, that's connected to the engine, resists that force, which presses them together, not allowing a shift to be made unless torque is reduced. So you do that. Now to reduce torque to shift, I want to downshift. I'm going to blip the throttle and go bloop. And look what happens. It spins this output gear quicker than what the output shaft gear is turning. All right, bear with me a little bit. All right, we'll do that one more time. So you got a closed throttle, and then you want to downshift, a clutches downshift, blip the throttle, blip. And it turns it away from the gear dog. And you have that opening again. At this point, there's no torque being transmitted. And if you have a preloaded shift lever, you got to downshift into the next gear. But if you don't shift, or you don't have a preloaded shift lever, or you wait too long to shift, if you keep that throttle open, it's going to be an open throttle. Or even if you just blip, what'll happen is it'll go whoop like that, and then the rear wheel will take over once again. And that ultimately is how seamless clutchless shifting takes place. You could upshift and downshift without the clutch. It does no harm to the gearbox. What a rider has to learn is proper technique. How to provide a sufficient blip or a dip of the throttle for upshift to just dip it, just slightly reduce it. And that's a skill in itself. A lot of people, they put up with a lot of crappy shifts and unsmooth shifts and think it's just a part of riding a motorcycle. But everything has to do with how the rider operates the throttle. Everything could be done with the right hand through control of the throttle, which controls the gas. When you're upshifting, you just slightly reduce the throttle a little bit with a preloaded shift lever. And when you're downshifting with a preloaded shift lever, just blip the throttle, just open it slightly and quickly and back off to closing the throttle. That's ultimately how it all works. The main thing ultimately is trying to understand how your constant mesh sequential transmission works. One of the key things to remember too is this takes place throughout all the gears. I'll show you a quick glance. Yeah, the key thing to remember is this could take place because every gear consists of a fixed spinning gear that's locked to the shaft and a free spinning gear that is not locked to the shaft. So when a throttle input is provided, one can spin faster than the other, thus separating, allowing no torque to be transferred, allowing a gear shift, a gear change. And this consists throughout the whole system. Every gear pair has one of each, a fixed spinning gear and a free spinning gear. And when a throttle input is provided, it allows one to spin just slightly faster than the other, which allows separation of gear dog and slot, which allows a gear change. And if that throttle input is provided adequately, but without excessive amount, you're able to get a very smooth clutchless up or downshift. And the same principle applies to clutch shifting. Ultimately, you're doing the same thing, a clutchless shift, but you're using the clutch. A lot of people, they talk about the infallibility of using the clutch lever, but a lot of riders don't use the clutch lever efficiently, and they don't even realize it. And you could get nasty shifts with a clutch by using the clutch also. So a lot of these riders that say that, oh, you need a clutch all the time, I could guarantee maybe a good majority of them don't even use the clutch efficiently. And that's not to insult people or anything like that. It's just to make them aware that it's more how you use your tools rather than just using it. And there's lots of people with nasty gearbox damage, and they've used the clutch for up and down shifts. I mean, it's not as simple as just pulling the clutch lever in. Once again, though, my name is Stephon Frazier, author of the Motorcycle Shifting Handbook. Available on Amazon and CreateSpace. Amazon allows you to preview chapters. Feel free to ask me questions about this video. If you buy the book and you want to ask me questions, come online and leave a message for me. Ask questions about it. I'm more than happy to help people with this. There's a lot of fallacy and myths being spread out, and you know, it keeps a lot of riders from riding at their maximum and being able to utilize their machines. This day and age, especially, there's more do's as far as motorcycle performance rather than don'ts. The don'ts are back in the 60s and the 50s, and we have so much technology. We've learned so much that there's a lot more that we can do rather than can't do. And when it comes to shifting, steering, you know, power delivery and everything else. So if you want to get away from all these myths and don't do this and don't do that, and you know, just think for yourself too as a rider. You know, if you buy my book, read it, think for yourself, come back with questions if you have any. But ultimately find out what you're working with first and then make a decision from there, rather than just believing, you know, whoever, especially if they don't ride. There's a lot of people who don't ride and they have all these rules. You really need to get in contact with somebody who rides and wants to think critically about what they're doing when they're on a motorcycle. I guess I'll sign off from here before I start running my mouth more. Once again, the Motorcycle Shifting Handbook by Stephon Frazier, available on Amazon and CreateSpace.com. Till next time, guys, enjoy the ride and be safe. All right, bye-bye.